On the 9th day of Tradmas, the internet gave to us TradCons being weird again. Hello, and welcome to the 12 Days of Tradmas. If you're new around here, my name is Kit, and Tradmas is a series I do in December where I talk about the harmful beliefs and ideas promoted by certain influencers, content creators, and so on. Basically, my normal content, but more of it and with a festive flair. And today, we're discussing the TradCon reaction to 4B.
Feminist women are refusing to date men, they're refusing to get married, they're refusing to have sex with men, and they are refusing to have children. This is their rise up moment. It's called the 4B movement. It's a radical feminist movement that actually originated from South Korea, but women in America are rising up.
Today, we are talking about 3 positive things about the 4B movement. I know this might be an interesting take, because this 4B movement is supposed to be a bunch of women swearing off men and making your lives harder, especially your dating lives.
And now, with Trump winning the election in America and half of American women believing that they are being stripped of their rights, they have decided to rebel yet again. And at first, this maybe seemed healthy, but then it took a turn for the worse. And we really need to address the 48% of white women who didn't vote for Trump, because I do not think they are okay.
Post-election, there is a group of women, many of them from the far left, who are expressing outrage and sorrow, claiming that their rights are going to be violated or are being violated. But is this really true? During this show, we are going to review some of the reactions by women to the election.
We are going to talk today about this crazy reaction response to Donald Trump winning by women. The women are not doing well. They're not all right. And so they are claiming to be forming a new movement, a new resistance movement that actually looks a lot like the Christian sexual ethic. Oh my goodness.
I hope I didn't scare anyone with that montage, but I wanted to give you all a heads up for what we're in for. Anyway, I'm sure everyone has heard about it by now, but 4B is a feminist movement in South Korea. The 4Bs stand for no sex with men, no giving birth, no dating men, and no marrying men. In Korean, those things start with a B, hence the name 4Bs. If you're interested in learning more, I'll link some articles below. And now you might be wondering, what on earth does a Korean movement have to do with the US? Well, apparently, after the election, there was a rush of women declaring that they're going 4B, and of course, a rush of media breathlessly reporting this development, and of course, a rush of conservatives mocking, belittling, what-ifing. And that is what we're going to be looking at today. I'll be saving my thoughts on 4B itself and what really made me angry at TradCons for the end. We're going to view some snippets from each of these commentators, starting with Girl Defined, who were so bereft that they made 2 videos about this. Liberal women refuse to have sex with men, and then protesting men isn't the answer to women's happiness, with the thumbnails titled, respectively, Sex Strike and Men Are Not the Problem. It was largely a whole bunch of nothing, as Girl Defined usually is, though Bethany was very passionate. She is definitely the emotive one. Anyway, let's hear what these 2 have to say.
We are so unhappy with what's happening. We are so unhappy. We feel like we are being oppressed. We feel like the patriarchy is taking over. And so what we are going to do is we are going to basically erase so many crucial parts of ourselves, and we're going to enter the workforce more fully. We are going to, I'm not really sure, but this is what feminists are saying they're going to do to fight the patriarchy. It is absolutely mind-blowing to me.
It's mind-blowing, and it's so sad because we as women who are buying into this mindset, this message, are buying into a massive lie that basically says, erase everything about you that makes you feminine, that makes you a woman. Okay, erase your sexuality and your sexual desires. Erase your desire for children. Don't even have them. Erase
fertility,
any attraction to men or being pursued by a man, romance, all of that. Out the window, garbage, done with it.
No husbands, no protection from men, no providing from men, no children, no love, no nurturing, no fertility. Like, what the heck is going on?
It is so sad, and it is not, it cannot land women in a happier place. And this is, to me, this is like not the pinnacle, because I'm sure it will continue to get crazier than this.
I think my favorites are when Kristen declares that she's sure it will continue to get crazier than this, and does she go on to explain? No. But women swearing off dealings with men isn't new, nor is it actually crazy. And my other favorite is Bethany saying women are foregoing protection from men. And I would like for both of them to tell us what Kristen thinks would be crazier than 4B and what Bethany thinks men are protecting women from. Are they going to do that? Of course not. But after bemoaning the evils of feminism, they inform us this is actually all because of sin, and we should buy their latest book because they've unpacked everything. I don't trust either of them to unpack a suitcase, so I think I'll pass. Moving on. Emily W. King. She gives common sense dating advice, and I must say, this is an odd response for a dating channel. If enough women went for B, men wouldn't need her sage wisdom anymore. But to be fair, she's not really a dating advice channel. She's a women stupid channel. And while we're here, I spotted this comment on one of her videos a while back and had a few thoughts. Men are also no longer trying harder. The feminists killed it. No means no, not try harder. Modern women need to get that through their heads. If you tell a guy no, he stops perusing you, I assume they mean pursuing, immediately. We don't need that headache. We're done playing games and, like you said, done with the whole mind reading BS. Response number 1, exactly. Modern women have broken the social contract. Since the rules no longer apply, men aren't applying either. Comment 2. I have had women wonder why I stopped pursuing them after they said no. Girl, I am willing to fight against the world for you, but I won't fight you to be with you. Well done. No does mean no. That needs to be respected, and consent is important. I'm not really sure how saying no means no is breaking the social contract, but anyway, if someone is trying to play that game with you, it's unlikely they're a feminist and you're right not to play. Anyway, on to the video. Men are supporting the 4B movement women don't understand with the thumbnail, 3 great things about the 4B movement women don't understand. That's the running theme with her thumbnails. Anyway, let's see what's on Emily's mind.
Some women are not going that crazy and they're calming it down a little bit, and what they're doing instead is they are kind of protesting more of the pro-life politics of Trump in their own way. So they're using more protection, or they're even going as far as going in and getting their tubes tied, or convincing their man to get chop chop.
Are we sure Emily knows what 4B is? It's no sex with men, not doubling up on protection. And using additional protection or getting outright sterilized isn't a matter of protest. That is self-protection. For yourself and or your partner. And given this is Emily's first positive, no, I don't think she knows what 4B is. There is no 4B light or modified 4B. You can't do 4B without doing the 4Bs. And no, people deciding they're going to use the pill and condoms, or they're going to get their tubes tied, doesn't mean they weren't using anything before. And this isn't a video about abortion, but as someone who's pro-choice, I feel obligated to respond to this.
When you listen to pro-choicers, and I'm not even going to get into what I personally believe, but I'm just saying, playing devil's advocate, for most pro-choicers, they absolutely deny this. They deny that getting rid of termination is not because they're using it as a birth control. It's because they will emphasize these terrible but rare cases where somebody has been raped and there's a resultant pregnancy from that. And I can't imagine the mental aspect with that. So of course, people are a little bit more understanding in those cases why a woman wouldn't really be able to mentally be able to handle a pregnancy. And then the other cases that they usually emphasize are cases where women will lose their lives potentially. Like there's a high medical risk where it's going to be a choice between her life or the potential baby's life.
Pro-choicers emphasize those because they do happen. However much folks like Emily try to wave them away like they're nothing, a simple blip in the system. And if she's honestly wondering why people want to double up on protection now, the simple reality is that anyone can be raped and become pregnant. It's estimated that there have been 64,000 rape-related pregnancies in states that have banned abortion. And even people with wanted pregnancies end up dying because doctors are understandably unwilling to risk their livelihood and potentially end up with a fine or jail time because a patient wasn't deemed sick enough to perform an abortion. Mama Dr. Jones has a great video on this, which I'll link below. And then there is the simple fact that no one should be made to continue a pregnancy against their will. Moving on to her second point, the women participating are about to get quite a lesson.
They're going to be learning what abstinence is. And they will also learn that you want to be in a relationship with somebody that you really know before being super intimate with them, because you never know what might be the result of that. Because when you're doing the act of procreation, there is a chance that you will procreate a child. And I think something that a lot of you guys know, let's face it, a lot of women joining this movement are not used to having healthy, long-term, loving relationships with men. They are used to casual and short-term, just kind of getting their needs met, which is why they often view procreating a child as a consequence rather than a blessing.
That didn't make sense. Or is she saying that women claiming to be 4B are going to want intimacy and are going to learn that sex creates kids? I really don't think Emily knows what 4B is. And her third point is that women who don't like men are taking themselves out of the dating pool, and I hate to have to be the one to tell her this, but women who don't like men weren't in that dating pool to begin with. That was it for Emily. Let's move on to Brett Cooper when she was still doing the comments section. And for fun, let me know in the comments how many subscribers you think the channel is going to lose now that she left. Anyway, let's start with how Brett describes 4B in South Korea.
Basically, TLDR, feminism is rampant in South Korea. Their birth rate is plummeting. Nobody's getting married. Nobody's having babies. And feminists really made this worse by creating the 4B movement, which means no sex with men, no dating, no marriage, and no children. And many of these women make that their full-time job, so they can also add no money to the list. They literally mooch off of their fathers, which just makes it even more comical.
Feminism isn't rampant in South Korea. Misogyny is. That's why 4B exists. It's not a punishment for men or society, but a way for women to protect themselves. And I would like her source for these Korean women who have made 4B their job and thus mooch off their father, because I couldn't find anything. How strange. It's almost like Brett doesn't know what she's talking about. But then we get to the meat of the issue. Brett is very upset by women shaving their heads and posting about it on TikTok.
How did we go from Britney Spears shaving her head to that being like, oh my gosh, she's really having a mental breakdown, to now this being some kind of female empowerment rallying cry? Did we forget what happened 20 years ago and what we all thought about it? Like, how has this changed so quickly?
Please correct me if I'm wrong, as it's been 20 years. No idea what Brett means by so quickly. But didn't Britney Spears shaving her head attract so much attention because she was acting erratically, and then she grabbed a razor and began shaving it herself? And honestly, you can't really compare Britney Spears to a random TikToker, though it does sound as though they're coming from similar places. Quote from Spears, "I was going through so much artificial stuff with my kids and Kevin at the time. He'd just left me and I was devastated. People thought that it was me going crazy and stuff like that, but people shave their heads all the time. I was going through a lot, but it was just kind of like me going through a little bit of rebellion or feeling free or shedding stuff that had happened, you know?" End quote. And continuing to talk about women shaving their heads, Brett finishes this off with,
per usual, the party of political correctness and inclusivity and moral superiority finds a way to belittle and trash a group of people that actually deserves love and deserves inclusion so that they can feel important.
At no point in any of the TikToks that Brett showed did a woman say, "Fuck those women with alopecia," or "I hate bald women with cancer," or "I'm doing this because I hate bald women." Brett and some other TikTokers are taking a personal decision that someone is making and twisting it to claim that others are being trashed and belittled. We all understand patriarchal beauty norms. That is what makes bald women feel as though they're not beautiful or not worthy of love. That is what made me wear a hat for 8 months after shaving mine, even when I was sweating. It's not the women shaving their head as a fuck you to the system that causes us to place undue importance on women having long hair.
And that's really all this is. You want attention and you want to feel important. So here you go. Here's 15 minutes of attention for you. I hope you realized you were acting like ridiculous entitled pricks.
Well done, Brett, on recognizing that some people want attention and giving it to them. Seriously, I looked up what accounts I could. Some were meme accounts, and they all had way fewer followers than she does. Though I suppose at over 4 million subscribers, it's hard to find accounts that are larger, but seriously, one didn't even have 2,000 followers, and another one only had 21,000. But that's it for Brett. Now on to Lila Rose.
So as you guys know, no shocker here, the majority of American women did vote Democrat. This is a general trend. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that Democrats and liberal progressive policies typically sound a lot more like they're going to help people and they're going to serve people and help communities and help those that are poor and suffering. That is typically the kind of bleeding heartstring, wear your heart on your sleeve, liberal stereotype that some women find really compelling. Now, one of the movements on the right lately has been to show women the most loving and the most compassionate way way to help people is actually through a lot of conservative policies.
I would love for Lala to share those conservative policies that she thinks are going to help people. Unfortunately, she doesn't, but she does tell us the following.
So the reality is less women, less Gen Z women, yes, young women are voting Democrat in this last election. And this is despite an incredible amount of money, almost $1 billion being spent by Democrats to tell women that if they don't vote for Kamala Harris, their rights will be taken away. As you guys know, the number one thing that they were promoting with that message is that they needed the right to have an abortion, because if they don't have the right to abortion, the right to end the life of a baby in their womb, then they're not going to somehow be free. The reality is, killing a baby does not make you free, and there's not a single pro-life law in the country that restricts miscarriage care or helping women during life-threatening emergencies with medical care.
No, laws aren't written so as to say, if a patient is miscarrying, let nature take its course. But they are being written in ways that doctors hesitate to provide care, because it's their lives and livelihoods on the line, and as I and many others have asked before, who determines what is sick enough to justify an abortion? If Sarah is going septic and Dr. Smith decides she needs an abortion and Sarah survives, it can just as easily be said that, well, Sarah survived, so obviously she wasn't that sick. And here's some more from Mama Dr. Jones.
Let's go specifically through the Georgia House bill, though. The question then became, is there something in the wording of this bill that related to this delay in care? Or was this just medical malpractice? First off, I will say all of these bills have wording that leads to delayed care. But in this one specifically, we can look at it and I could tell you, I could have told you this would be a problem before this happened. So I have the bill pulled up here. This is House Bill 481 from Georgia. This is where they talk about what we're interested in here. Abortion means the act of using, prescribing, or administering any instrument, substance, device, or other means with a purpose to terminate a pregnancy with knowledge that termination will, with reasonable likelihood, cause the death of an unborn child, provided, however, that any such act shall not be considered an abortion if the act is performed with the purpose of. So she had already taken the Miffy and Mizo that she got out of state, and now she's in a situation where there is retained tissue and she has a septic uterus. However, they've defined here abortion as being any instrument or device that terminates a pregnancy. She is still very clearly pregnant. It doesn't say there has to be a heartbeat. And in fact, in the next subsection A, you can infer there doesn't have to be a heartbeat. So this is where we see removing a dead unborn child caused by spontaneous abortion. Do we see the problem here? Spontaneous. She had admitted to having gone to North Carolina, taking Miffy and Mizo to intentionally end this pregnancy. Something that those doctors never would have known if not for Amber just wanting to get the best care she could and be honest with her healthcare team. The outcome might have been different, but that's not on her. She shouldn't have to decide, do I tell my healthcare team the whole truth or not? This is ridiculous. They've said it can not be considered abortion if it's removing a dead unborn child by spontaneous abortion, but this is dead tissue, not spontaneous abortion. They do have the medical emergency part, so technically this part would count, but I will again refer you to at what point does it start counting and why are we putting people in a position to have to question whether or not it would be acceptable and at what point it goes from not acceptable to acceptable. I think it's also incredibly important to consider where the doctors were in the world, Georgia, the current volatility with regards to this topic, the extreme views of some people on this topic, and what you are up against as the obstetrician. I don't know what went through the first or second or team of obstetric doctors' heads or what was going on behind the scenes. However, even if they had been completely on board with immediately doing a DNC, knowing it might risk their license if someone came back and said it's not actually something that needed to be done, even if that was the case, which I'm not saying it was, you are then up against who do I need to help me get this patient to the operating room? I need an anesthetic doctor. So you've got to have them on board because you can't do this with no anesthetic. I need operating room nurses. So their personal beliefs or fears of what will happen are then also at play. And maybe they don't realize how dire the situation is. And you just can't find anybody to help you anesthetize your patient or be their nurse for the procedure. You can't just do a D&C by yourself. This isn't just one person making one decision. And the gray area of when it becomes unnecessary to necessary, medical emergency versus not, is real easy in hindsight, but it's not the same when you are sitting there in front of a patient having to make those decisions and get everybody else around you on board with it.
These laws are written to create doubt, and then politicians hold up their hands and say, that wasn't the intention, or the doctors are doing this on purpose. Bullshit. These politicians aren't stupid, they know what they're doing. But that's enough of Lila, on to Allie Beth, who isn't much better. This is how she sums up 4B.
So it really started as kind of like an online forum for women to freely discuss how to navigate and imagine life without men, and creates a sense of solidarity among women. So really, it's like a female incel movement. Like if you know what involuntary celibacy is, incel, that typically refers to these men online who really hate women.
She knows what incel stands for, involuntary celibacy, but does she know what involuntary means? If you're not having sex, but you want to be, that's involuntary. Regardless of whether or not you want to, but you're choosing not to, that's voluntary. So no, 4B is not just the female version of incel. Oh my goodness. And what a way to brush aside the struggles of South Korean women. For anyone wondering, Allie Beth mainly takes this in a religious perspective, and though she dedicated so much time to this topic, she doesn't think it, or feminism, will last.
I just want to disappoint you a little bit if you are convincing yourself that this girl power movement is really going to save you and that you are in solidarity with thousands or millions of women across the world that are sticking it to the patriarchy. Like, all of your friends that are in your group text claiming that they are going to be a part of this 4B movement, they're not deleting their wedding Pinterest boards. I promise you. Like, they are still thinking about what they want their wedding dress to look like. They are still looking at pictures of engagement rings. They are still on their dating apps. And as soon as they get a strapping guy that comes along, asks them on a date, opens the door for them, and pays for their meals, they will forget feminism so fast. That is I would say, the majority of women. Not all women. I know many women who in their college days fancied themselves liberal feminists, and then they found a good Christian guy who set them straight in a lot of ways and influenced them in a really good way, didn't force them to think anything and didn't belittle them or demean them in any way, actually respected their intellect and their opinions a whole lot, but just by how he lived his life and the things he said, led these women in a better direction. And I think that's beautiful.
If all it takes for you, in general, doesn't matter if someone is a man or a woman, to abandon or forget your beliefs as an attractive person showing interest in you, those weren't beliefs you sincerely held. And no, I wouldn't say it's normal for someone to change what they believe because of who they're dating. Why would you do that? Anyway, this next part has nothing to do with 4B, but I want to include it. For posterity.
Here's just a couple things I want to say to the women who might find themselves genuinely scared of Donald Trump's presidency. Your life is going to get better. Gas is going to be more affordable. Groceries are going to be more affordable. You are going to feel safer. Housing costs are hopefully going to go down. And your life will get better.
Let's all remember that. And then she goes on to talk about abortion. It's so interesting to me that Allie Beth and friends talk about abortion so much, but accuse people worried about abortion access of only caring about abortion. Conservatives always lead the conversation. They freak out about something: gay marriage, critical race theory, gas stoves, abortion, trans people. And so then we have to talk about it over and over and over until they move on to something else to fearmonger about. In other news,
there are 8 states that tragically allow abortion through all 9 months. If it is let's test this. If you think that this is the most fundamental issue, the greatest issue, then why don't you flee like a refugee to California or to Washington or to Oregon or to Illinois or to New York? If this is so important to you, is it really that hard for you to leave Arkansas and to move over a few states to New Mexico?
The privilege is just oozing. She's never thought of, and she doesn't care, that most people don't have the money to just up and move to another state. And even if someone has savings, how quickly would those savings run out while they try to find a job in their new state? What about kids having to change schools? Why should someone have to leave the place they grew up because their bodily autonomy isn't considered a fundamental human right there? Why would the United States have different levels of bodily autonomy depending on the state anyway? Allie Beth goes on to note that people try to flee North Korea, so if you can't just make a road trip, she doesn't believe it's really that important of an issue. Allie Beth is pretending she doesn't know that conservatives are trying to make travel to obtain an abortion illegal. I'm not buying that she doesn't know. And in other news, water is wet and Allie Beth is disingenuous.
Tina on X says, has 200,000 likes. Immediately stop using period and pregnancy trackers in the US. Don't put another piece of data. Put in another piece of data. Delete it. Okay. Because Donald J. Trump is going to be hacking your Flow app to see if you had cramps yesterday. Okay. That's normal, insane behavior.
No one thinks Donald J. Trump is going to personally browse or even request every woman's individual period tracker data. However, data is requested by law enforcement, and period trackers could provide that. That is what the poster is referring to when she urged women to delete their period trackers, and Allie Beth knows that. And that was it for her. Let's talk about what really made me angry at TradCons, starting with this TikTok that Emily King included in her video.
I'm not going to keep quiet anymore because I just saw the most heartbreaking video. To all the women who decided to shave their head in support of this 4B movement, stop it. And not stop it because you can't do what you want or have freedom to do what you want, but you're being offensive. You're selfish. I just saw a woman post a video of her little girl, couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with cancer, with a bald head, saying that she's held her daughter numerous nights because her daughter was crying because when she lost her hair, she didn't feel beautiful anymore. So basically what you're saying is you're trying to make yourself unattractive by shaving your head because you don't like the president that was elected. Do you hear yourselves and see yourselves?
It's heartbreaking that a 5-year-old has to deal with cancer, but women shaving their heads, regardless of the reason, has nothing to do with that. Patriarchal beauty standards do tell us that long hair is desirable, for a woman of course, not a man, and it's also so sad that a 5-year-old has already internalized that.
Like, enough is enough. Grow up. Your entitlement is disgusting.
It's entitled to shave your own head? I was unaware of that when I shaved my head last year. And for those who don't know, this short haircut you see on me right now isn't the result of a haircut, it's the grow out of when I shaved my head last December. I was unaware I was being entitled when I did that.
There's actually women around the world that are oppressed.
And I would be willing to bet this woman doesn't think about them except to shame other women for speaking up. Women facing more oppression in another country doesn't mean we remain silent about what occurs in ours. And just because you have rights now doesn't mean they're guaranteed forever. The people Trump has surrounded himself with haven't been quiet about their intentions, and I would like to take this moment to remind everyone that they're not waiting for his inauguration. After reversing Roe, conservatives are now trying to argue that a fertilized egg has rights, which opens the door to making contraception illegal, and they're trying to argue against mother's life exceptions. In the Idaho court case from AP News, John Bursch, an attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom representing Idaho, asked the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals panel of 11 judges to urgently lift the injunction preventing the state from enforcing its abortion ban in emergency room settings, saying it harms Idaho's sovereignty, harms women, and harms unborn children. And I want to be extremely clear. After reversing Roe, conservatives didn't go all in to ensure families and kids have a better life, or even just food and healthcare. Instead, they've set about trying to create more restrictions. And a record 510 anti-LGBT bills were introduced in 2023. In 2024, there's 574 to protect kids. But child marriage is still legal in 37 states, and guess who keeps shutting down attempts to change that? Child marriage actually does harm kids, unlike the existence of gay and trans people. And this is just scratching the surface. The United States is not perfect by any means, and pretending we are will do us no favors.
You live in the freest country.
The United States is not the freest country. It doesn't even rank in the top 10 of the Freedom Index.
And you, no matter what you think, you haven't lost one right. No one's bothered to answer my question or list the rights that you have lost. Because you haven't. You're living in a delusional world. It's called get some mental help. Go to a therapist. You've created an imaginary world that you believe is real. Roe v. Wade was overturned a long time ago.
All that to say, she's talking about abortion, which she apparently doesn't consider a right. She also apparently thinks 2 years was a long time ago, but silly us, we're forgetting.
You guys don't want the government, the federal government, in your business. Do you understand what Roe v. Wade even meant when it was overturned? Because I think there's like a misconnect here.
There is a disconnect here, but it's not what she's thinking.
It means, and I'm going to say it for the 50th time, it means it was the federal government has been taken out of the equation to have any control over your bodies. It was given to the states so you could choose what state you want to live in. Do you understand that? I honestly don't think you do.
Ah yes, because it's so easy to just pick up and move. I thought this was incredibly stupid, but she saved the best for last.
There's less government involved in making decisions about your body. You don't get that. I do think it's a level of education.
I would like to hear her explain how overturning a law that said the government was restricted in how it could restrict abortion, so governments could make laws restricting abortion, and has even led to attempts at restricting travel and speech, means there's less government involved in making decisions about your body. And now back to Lila Rose, who, like the passionate TikToker in Emily's video, would like us to know that Western women aren't oppressed and aren't in danger of being oppressed. And before we get into this, I want to say, we're going to discuss what Lila thinks are women's privileges. Stating facts and studies that say the opposite doesn't mean I don't think men have problems or have it easy or whatever. Unless you're part of the 1%, we're all getting screwed over in one way or another. But this is about women, so we're going to talk about women. If you want to talk about men, I recommend Ex-Patriarch and Dark Matter 2525. That being said, Lila.
Western women, American women, are the most privileged women in the world. We have every single freedom and right that men have, and then some. In fact, if you're a Western woman today, you are more likely to graduate college than men. You're more likely to attend college than men. And many of you are more likely to graduate high school than men. Women in the workforce are almost 50-50 with men.
Now, more women than men are attending college these days, but in 2022, 67.9% of men ages 25 and older were employed, compared with 55.4% of women. Interestingly, the rate of employment narrowed with further education, which does strike me as curious given the TradCon push to not bother with college. As for the rest, let's pin it. Lila is going to mention it again.
So this idea that women are not faring as well as men, or they're somehow less than men today under the law, there's not a single law that you can point me to that in any way unequally treats women versus men.
Yes, we can. The 13 states that ban abortion outright. I know that doesn't count to Lila, but it not only affects women, it kills them.
Did you know that women now make up 60% of all college enrollments? This has broad social and economic implications because, as you know, those with college degrees often get higher paying jobs than those who do not have college degrees. Not always, but often.
And though women are graduating college at higher rates than men now, the wage gap still exists. I wonder what Lila would have to say about the fatherhood bonus and motherhood penalty.
There's a lot of other categories too where women are faring well. For example, mental health services. It is typically seen as a good thing for women to pursue mental health services, but it can often be stigmatized for men. Another example is military service. If there would be a draft, men are the ones that are going to get drafted, not women. Men are the first that go to war to protect the country, not women.
That is patriarchy. Patriarchy says men are strong and don't need help, and that women are weak and need help. But to circle back to the earlier point that I can think of a law that affects women and not men, I trust that everyone watching this agrees that governments should have no control over their citizens' bodily autonomy. They shouldn't be able to decree that someone has to remain pregnant, and they shouldn't be able to decree that someone has to go to war. But the simple fact is that the draft hasn't been enacted since 1973. But even with Roe, the US has the highest maternal mortality rate in the Western world. And I think it's very telling of the general American attitude toward women that, instead of being concerned about that, people like Lila are worried about outlawing abortion. For that matter, the US also has the highest infant mortality rate among high-income countries, and they don't care about that either. It's just about abortion.
When it comes to the family court system, there's a lot of criticism that the family court system often benefits the mother more than the father, making more concessions for women than for men.
It's interesting how one small group of people can take one small survey done in one small county, manipulate the ever-living shit out of those numbers, and then propagate one of the biggest lies about fathers and family court I have ever heard.
The advocate here is responding to one of my videos on child custody on her YouTube channel, taking issue with the idea that men who seek custody typically get it, and in particular with the Massachusetts study on gender bias, which said that 70% of those men who seek custody obtain custody. Now, Lauren's was the first account I ever blocked on TikTok, long before I ever started making videos on these topics. But I take her concerns about misinformation and accurately reporting the facts as genuine, and so I'll unblock her and tag her in this, which will be my most comprehensive video on father bias in family courts that I've ever done. And let's start out by correcting this.
You have zero stake in this game as a 40-year-old childless man, and yet here you are trying to be the hero of it by spreading lies about other men.
Now, a quick scroll through my content shows that I'm not childless. I share 50-50 custody of our son, a teenager who is on the spectrum. Now, as for my stake in this, Lauren herself admits that men are actively discouraged from seeking custody, and so I think it's on all of us to accurately report what kind of biases do exist in family court, as well as encouraging men to be involved fathers, not just at the time of separation, but when the child is born, and also afterwards when they get custody, in order to overturn the absolutely horrific rates of father abandonment. Now, Lauren has only a single source to dispute the Massachusetts gender bias study, which she presents as a paper written by Mark Rosenthal. Except that it's not a paper, it's an article that Rosenthal wrote on his own website. Rosenthal is also not a researcher, but a software engineer like myself, and he was a speaker at the International Conference on Men's Issues in 2019. And that conference is run by a Voice for Men, an anti-feminist group the Southern Poverty Law Center has declared a hate group, largely because they advocate for violence against women, and their founder, Paul Elam, has openly defended grape culture. So I think we need to be careful about how we represent this. It is not an independently peer-reviewed study or paper, but a blog article written by an MRA misogynist with ties to a hate group. Now, Rosenthal obtains the data that the Massachusetts study is based on, and it's important to point out here that that data set does not dispute anything that is in the Massachusetts study. When we look at fathers who ask for custody, they get sole or joint legal custody in 84% of cases. But Rosenthal is not happy with these numbers, so he fudges the math. He drops joint custody entirely from consideration and focuses only on sole custody, saying that when fathers seek custody, they get sole custody 45% of the time. But when mothers seek custody, they get sole custody 74% of the time. Which he then uses as the headline for his article, that mothers' requests for sole custody are granted 65% more than fathers' requests, or about 1 2/3. But as I've covered before, men self-report that their wives are 4 times more likely to be the primary caretaker of their children than they are. When we look at stay-at-home parents, again, mothers are 4 times more likely to be the stay-at-home primary caretaker of their children than fathers. And when we look at census data and custodial parents, again, mothers are 4 times more likely to be the custodial parent than fathers. But family courts are assigning sole custody to mothers, not at 4 times, but not even at twice the rate of fathers, shows an incredible bias towards fathers. To put this another way, men who contest custody are twice as likely to walk out of court being the primary caretaker than they were walking in. Which then brings me to Lauren's next point,
where the study still definitively concludes that mothers get sole physical custody 65% more often than dads, only to cherry pick the facts so that only your narrative is supported, then push this as some irrefutable nationwide fact.
Now, Lauren misspeaks here and means legal custody, not physical custody. But on her other point about cherry picking a single data source, ignoring all else just to reaffirm your own narrative, it's important to remember that Rosenthal's article here doesn't dispute any of the claims that Massachusetts study makes. Not only that, but it only deals with one study. The Massachusetts report actually cites 5 studies in order to make its case. A study of law professionals that show that fathers get sole or joint physical custody 94% of the time. The Middlesex study that Rosenthal uses that shows that men get some form of legal custody 84% of the time. A second study from Middlesex County that shows that men get some form of legal custody 79% of the time. A study from LA County in California that shows that men get sole custody 63% of the time, as well as a nationwide study that shows that men get some form of custody in 51% of cases. Now, Lauren also says that the reason why Massachusetts does show a bias towards fathers is because of unique laws that it has in setting up default temporary custody orders for joint custody, and that no other state has these laws, which is why this trend isn't replicated in other states. But that's not correct. The Massachusetts study itself points to data from California and nationwide, which also shows this trend. But Massachusetts was not the only state to conduct a gender bias study, like Florida, for example. And what they found was not only a disturbing trend of fathers to contest custody, not for custody of the kids, but in order to gain an advantageous property settlement, but that when men did contest for custody, they were largely successful. Next up, Maryland, where 85% of judges said that fathers get a fair and serious hearing, where they said that anti-father bias is more a reflection of social bias discouraging men from seeking custody than any evidence of a judicial bias, and that when men did overcome this and seek custody, they got a fair and serious hearing. Not only that, but courts were actively biased towards involved fathers and gave them greater deference. Meanwhile, mothers were unfairly punished if they wanted to work or if they had a new partner, and that all these factors gave men a greater advantage and bias in family custody cases. Now on to New York, which found the same biases as Maryland, where involved fathers were given greater deference, meanwhile mothers were punished for wanting to work or having new relationships. Which is why the Civic Research Institute, when they surveyed all of the literature on child custody, pointed out that overall, over 40 states and numerous district courts had commissioned studies into gender bias, and that these had found unanimously a pervasive bias against mothers. In fact, so pervasive was this bias that when Florida's task force was commissioned to start their study, they skipped the question of if gender bias exists, saying that this has already been well established. And when taken overall, these studies show that gender bias does sometimes affect men, but it is overwhelmingly and disproportionately disadvantaging women. And we can see this lack of bias against men in more recent studies, such as this 2007 study into the 21st District Court in South Carolina. And what they found was that fathers who contested for custody got either sole or joint physical custody almost 60% of the time. Across total cases, that was 31% for fathers, so it almost doubled. But even that 31% is in line with the data from other studies, such as this custody exchange survey of hundreds of law professionals across every state in the country, which showed that on average fathers get about 35% of custody time. Now, why is that 35% and not 50%? Well, I covered that extensively in that video, but in summary, it's because men don't do 50% of the childcare before the custody hearing. And all of this is before we even talk about the numerous studies that show an even greater bias towards fathers when they are accused of violence or when they accuse the mothers of alienation, and there are scores of those studies. Now, Lauren's absolutely correct when she implies that using a single data point from a single study to form a narrative would be reckless. But the reason why we say that fathers who actively seek custody are often likely to get it is because there are multiple studies from multiple states across multiple decades that show this to be true. And yet here you are, Lauren, admitting that you are struggling to find any studies that show a pervasive bias against fathers and towards mothers.
Thank you, ex-patriarch.
Let's talk about social support systems. Welfare, childcare support, and housing benefits often prioritize single mothers, putting men who may be struggling at a disadvantage.
Editing Kit taking over because I just listened to this back, and is Lila trying to tell us that single mothers receive more assistance than men in general? Because, yes, single parents get more assistance than adults in general. When I fell on hard times, I couldn't find an agency, government or not, that would help me because I didn't have kids. If I had, it would have been different. But anyway, yes, women typically make less than men and typically have custody of the kids. Due to mutual decision, not bias, 91% of custody cases are decided outside of court, so more women than men receive financial support, such as it is. And I would like to note that Lila thinks women shouldn't work when they have kids, which means in the case of a split, the woman in the relationship wouldn't have a work history to fall back on. She's trying to use things she doesn't even believe in, women working, patriarchy being harmful, as some sort of gotcha. Anyway, after all that, Lala concludes that if women are struggling today, it's because of a crisis of meaning, and why yes, she does think that relationships give that meaning to life, and abortion takes away that meaning. It's truly wild how much Lila attributes to abortion, and yet she doesn't actually advocate for anything that would lower rates of abortion. From here, Lila decides to tell us how much better we have it, and I do find it curious that Lila mentions girls being forced into marriages in Iraq, considering lowering the marriage age to 9, but she doesn't mention how that happens in the US. I know this is meant to make American Western women feel ashamed for even thinking about advocating for themselves when women in other parts of the world have it so much worse, but to me, it's shameful that Lila is using these women. She only mentions them in the context of, you think you have it bad? And it's painfully obvious how widespread misogyny is around the world, which is probably not the takeaway Lila intended. So, sorry Lila, I'm not going to shut up and just be glad to be an American. I'm going to uplift and advocate for women in other countries when and where I can, and I recommend Ms. Magazine and the Instagram account Feminist as well as Middle East Matters. Feel free to drop any of your recommendations below as well, but I am going to continue to speak out about American failings, and realistically, as an American, this is the only country I can even hope to affect as someone with limited resources and influence. And at that, it's a shame this is the way Lila chooses to use hers. Anyway, let's take a moment before shifting gears. As for my thoughts on 4B, if that's something a woman is doing for herself, not to punish men or make them sorry, I'm all for it. But if you're doing it to stick it to patriarchy, it's not going to work and it probably won't last. Do it for you, not because you think it will make someone suffer. That someone isn't going to care, and if you don't really want to be doing it, you're not going to be able to keep it up. It's a commitment. And I do hope the women declaring their 4B are also pairing that with some other action. This is probably going to piss some people off, but I just can't find it within myself to get all that worked up over social media trends. Have any of them ever lasted? And that's it for the 9th day of Tradmas. Thank you so much for watching, and I would like to give extra thanks to my patrons. My socials and Patreon are linked below, along with sources and resources, and I'll see you in the next video.